Hi, everybody. This is John Shepard here, and this is my presentation on human rights, global justice, current event discussion here. So, my discussion is related to the article here. I will post it separately as well, but it's from LifeSite News. The title is UN Claims Pro-Life Laws Protecting Unborn Babies Are Violence Against Women. So, at issue here in this article is a claim by the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is in violation of several sections of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women because it is illegal in Northern Ireland to have an abortion except in cases where it is medically necessary to save the life or preserve the health of the mother. The relevant laws in this dispute are the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is a UN treaty that the UK ratified in 1986, and something called the Optional Protocol to that convention, which I'll mention later on, went into force in the UK in December 2004. Also, the Eighth Amendment to the Irish Constitution, which declares the equal human rights for the unborn, and Sections 58 and 59 of the Offenses Against the Person Act of 1861, and Section 25(1) of the Criminal Justice Act of Northern Ireland in 1945. So it's the UN treaty versus the Irish Constitution and criminal statutes in Northern Ireland that are in dispute. And they are in dispute. This article here was posted just today about the upcoming referendum, which will happen near the end of May in Ireland, to basically repeal the Eighth Amendment to the Irish Constitution, which would allow for changing laws relative to abortion in Northern Ireland. And so there's a great deal of controversy currently in Northern Ireland about this issue. And the optional protocol, which I mentioned earlier, is something that is attached to the original convention that established provisions for persons and groups to bring claims of discrimination which they believe are in violation of the convention to the UN for investigation and redress. So someone thinks somebody is breaking their treaty covenants, they can come, because of this optional protocol, they can make a complaint to the UN about what they believe is wrong. On December 9th, 2010, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women received information from several sources which are not named in the particular report, which is listed at the bottom of the screen there, pursuant to Article 8 of the Optional Protocol, which is simply the one that allows people to bring complaints, that alleges the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has committed grave and systematic violations of rights under the Convention due to restrictive access to abortion for women and girls in Northern Ireland. So that's the claim violation. In January of 2014, the UK submitted its reply to the committee's inquiry, indicating that it is lawful to perform an abortion in Northern Ireland where necessary to preserve the woman's life or where there exists a risk of real and serious adverse effects on the woman's physical or mental health, either long-term or permanent. It stated that although procuring an abortion is criminalized, prosecutions are rare. Further, Northern Ireland residents can travel to other UK countries, although they are not entitled to the National Health Service coverage and must pay privately, and internationally to access abortion where it is available on broader grounds. The UK denies any breach of its obligations and asserts that revision of its legislation is not envisaged. So they don't plan on changing their rules, and they don't think they're in violation because they do in fact allow for abortions in situations that they feel are necessary. In the report issued by the committee in February of 2018, so that was just last month, the committee rejected the defense claims of the UK and made 13 specific recommendations that the state should implement. Chief among these, I didn't list all of them. There's a link at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try and put that in my link as well online, to the actual report, where all 13 recommendations are listed. But they're basically telling the UK you have to repeal your criminal statutes, and you have to adopt legislation that expands the ground for legal abortions in at least these following cases. You have to allow for women's health without your caveat of long-term or permanent effects. You have to allow for abortion in the case of rape or incest and severe fetal impairment. So, interestingly, there is no language in the convention itself, the optional protocol, or the committee report that indicates what enforcement options the UN has or what sanctions the UN or the UK faces for not implementing the recommendations. Public policy versus public opinion. Public policy on this issue in Northern Ireland is basically many Northern Ireland politicians, including the Democratic Unionist Party, oppose any liberalization of the abortion laws. That's again a quote from the Guardian newspaper there. So public policy is what the lawmakers are affirming as what they want to be public policy. Public opinion, however, appears to be somewhat divided and in conflict with that. Same article says nearly 80% of the public believes abortion should be legal as a result of rape or incest. So there's apparently some obvious differences there. And then finally, a quick recommended approach for addressing this issue. One would be to define human rights as narrowly as possible and eliminate topics that are widely controversial out of the definition of human rights, which is essentially what the United States is doing right this minute. In the link here, this is a headline from a LifeSite news article, again quoting a report that the United States is about to issue, and I quote from that report here, where the Trump administration tells the UN that abortion is not a human right. So basically they're saying to the UN, the letter from pro-life human rights groups to the U.S. that congratulates them for taking the stand, says the UN human rights bodies have pressured 154 countries 479 times to liberalize their abortion laws based on their own personal views of human rights treaties. They point out that the U.S. will send a strong signal that this is unacceptable and that the U.S. adheres to a proper understanding of human rights. So again, the idea is you're including too much in the definition. Human rights advocates contend that attempts to expand human rights to include widely controversial topics such as abortion and LGBT issues has the tendency to water down existing human rights. If everything is a human right, then nothing is a human right. So if you can't rein in the definition by appealing to, universally accepted standards, use the deliberative school, as I mentioned here, one would be two can play the same game. The UN can charge that the UK is violating human rights because it causes harm to women. You can use the same argument to say that there are plenty of scientific studies that show significant and massive detrimental effects to women who have abortions, and that allowing women indiscriminately to have them is, in a sense as well, creating harm to women. So a case could be made in the alternative there. Essentially, that's a thorny issue and a good, I think, example of a conflict between, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and how it affects the sovereignty of a state and its own internal laws. Kind of a thorny issue. It'll be worked out possibly by May with the election that Northern Ireland's going to have. So thanks for listening.